It was some 30 years ago that Sri Lanka, one of the most enchanting lands on earth, the Paradise Island, sacrificed its beauty, prosperity, and the safety of its people to the unwisely calculated gains of war. Historical circumstances created by political ambitions and divisions between two ethnic groups led Sri Lanka into chaos, devastation, and loss of life, creating nothing but deep, painful cracks and scars across the very fabric of the entire nation. What ideally should have been one land and one nation took on the stress and strain of war to prove yet again just how unnatural, self-hurting, and futile it is when people take up the path of destruction to create a new world. No tree has branches so foolish as to fight among themselves. There were attempts made to avoid ultimately resorting to war. However, instead of trying to reach a political settlement to the ongoing disputes, an organization emerged that decided to take up arms. The LTTE soon eliminated all other Tamil political groups and organizations and began a series of attacks on civilians and government institutions alike. From that point on, there was no turning back. The government realized that the only option it had in order to finally put out the fire had been to build a new fire. The fire to end all fires. A swift military action was required to dismantle the terrorist organization, which in reality held the entire nation hostage, Sinhalese, Tamils, and Muslims alike. In an appalling demonstration of how all humanity and reason have been drained from their desperate actions, the LTTE virtually took hundreds of thousands of civilians hostage and turned them into human shields rather than laying down its weapons. After the battle was over, hundreds of thousands of innocent Tamil civilians poured into the army-held territories, desperate, impoverished, and frightened. Many of them were born into a world that knew no freedom, no tolerance, and held no choices for them but fear, devastation, and pain. The LTTE ruled with an iron fist, crushing each and every attempt to question their authority. The Tamil population in LTTE-held areas in the north and east of the country had been indoctrinated to resent the rest of its nation and its institutions, the Sri Lanka Army being one of them. This was an incredibly harsh and inauspicious emotional and psychological environment for the Sri Lanka Army, tasked with winning the hearts and minds of Tamils. And these hearts and minds had to be won. The government and the army knew that without this ultimate victory, no national reunification and final reconciliation would be possible. The real work for the government of Sri Lanka to ensure lasting peace has started, with a new task for the Sri Lankan army, a great challenge, quite simply described as 5R. Resettlement, Reconstruction, Rehabilitation, Reintegration, and Reconciliation. Some of the deadliest traces of the LTTE terrorist rule were the fields of landmines, indiscriminately spread without any documentation all around the area. The population, ex-LTTE cadres and civilians alike, were held in the IDP camps, both for evaluation and accommodation purposes, as they had no place to go before the land had been cleared of its mines. Therefore, demining was the very first task that the Sri Lankan army has been entrusted with. Valuable help had been provided by several international organizations, but most of the work had been done by the army's own forces. And all those who know what kind of work entails clearing minefields can have nothing but respect for the expertise and the bravery of those who are actually doing it. The minefields are being cleansed one by one, enabling the gradual return of the internally displaced persons. However daunting, the demining operation has been only the beginning of the resettlement process. The brutal civil war had destroyed most of the infrastructure, including people's homes. This called for the rebuilding and the construction of houses, roads, schools, hospitals, and all other essential infrastructure. "30 years of conflict left these areas completely underdeveloped. Roads had to be constructed in order to reconnect the north and the south and reunite the country. Again, the government of Sri Lanka made available all of its available resources for the new roads to be built and the old ones reconstructed. Railroads, power lines, water pipelines, and many other infrastructure projects commenced simultaneously. Valuable help is being provided by international donors. Indian housing projects and rebuilding of the railway lines, roads constructed by China, and assistance from the European Union, Asian Development Bank, NGOs, and INGOs. With the development of the transportation routes, traveling between two previously detached parts of the country has become much easier. The first tourists in many years have started pouring into the region, giving a boost to the tourist industry and connecting the island's diverse cultures at the same time. With the war ended, Army soldiers are now made available for the unprecedented and crucial task of rebuilding the country. The Army is building numerous houses in all the war-affected areas, most of them financed from its own budget. What it really meant was that Sri Lankan soldiers had to give parts of their own rations, and often even finance donations to buy whatever material was needed to build a house. Most of the soldiers engaged in building these homes had no home of their own. The population of the war-ravaged areas relied heavily on agriculture for their livelihood. The final goal of the 5R strategy being to enable internally displaced persons to become self-reliant members of society, it was a matter of utmost importance to ensure the adequate supply of water. Before long, tanks were reconstructed and thousands of water pumps provided for the small family farms in the remote areas, so that they too could start and maintain their own independent food production. Another important source of income and sustainability in these areas is fishing. Due to security reasons, some restrictions were put in place, limiting freedom of fishing and prompting local fishermen to engage in fishing from the shore. Gradually, all the restrictions have been removed, and the fishing industry is now steady. The old, well-known images of the bustling Jaffna fish market re-emerged once again. Well aware that no progress and prosperity is possible Without a stable and accessible to all education system, the government of Sri Lanka has made it its priority to embark promptly into the restoration of damaged schools, as well as building and providing for new ones. The economic recovery had to be in step with the education process if the future of the country is to be safe and sustainable. The next essential need foreseen by the government of Sri Lanka was the one of further personal improvement and development. Therefore, sports were encouraged among the youth. Sports fields were being designed and built, and many renowned coaches being consulted. Being the most popular sport in the country, cricket easily became the mutual language of the youth, transcending all boundaries. What is still lacking in certain areas is modern medical infrastructure. In order to deal with that, some temporary venues are being made available to meet the needs of the people. At the same time, the army is building permanent premises just meters away. Having no sufficient funds assigned, the army resorted to its already usual ingenuity and employed the combination of available material, its own free labor, and the reassignment of the parts of their own funds, making cuts in its spending wherever possible and whenever needed. When more complex medical attention is needed, patients in serious condition are being evacuated to the state-of-the-art hospitals in Colombo. This was only made possible owing to the coordination of the Sri Lanka Army, the help of charitable donors, and by the contribution of the hospitals waiving their fees.
ஹாஸ்பிட்டலில் போய் செக் பண்ணி பார்க்க டாக்டர் சொன்னது ரெண்டு கிழமைகளும் ஆப்ரேஷன் செய்யணும்டா. அப்போ எங்களோட வசதி இல்லாததால் ஆமியாக்கா வந்து உதவி செய்து பிளேட்ல எல்லாம் கூட்டி கொண்டு போய் அங்கே ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்லாம் வந்து ஆப்ரேஷன் செய்யலாம் வந்து பார்த்து பிளட் எல்லாம் கொடுத்தாங்க. அவங்க உதவியை செய்தது.
30 years of relentless war have seen many people born into it, not knowing any other reality. The emotional, physical, and mental scars of war are borne by one and all. Some had to deal with lost property, some with the loss of loved ones, and some with their own loss of arms and legs. The same goes for the former LTT members, in dire need of rehabilitation and reintegration into society. The process usually starts with identification of such people, followed by profiling and final counseling to help them face and embrace the future. Most former LTT cadres had no professional training whatsoever. They were born into an environment of conflict, where they were given weapons instead of pencils or cricket bats. To help such people, educational rehabilitation centers have been put in place to provide basic vocational training and education, enabling them to get jobs for the first time in their lives.
என்னை வந்து இப்போ விடுதலை புலிகள் வந்து பலசுவாக தான் பிடித்தாரு. அங்கே அவர்கள் எங்களை ஒரு வலுக்கட்டாயமாக பிடித்து விட்டு 6 மாதம் எங்களை அவர்களுடன் பேசினார். நாங்கள் ஒரு 15 பேர் அவரிடம் தப்பி சென்று விட்டு இராணுவத்துடன் சரணடைந்தோம். புனர்வாழ் நிலையத்துக்கு கொண்டு சென்றார்கள். அங்கு வந்து எங்களுக்கான வேலைவாய்ப்பு எல்லாத்தையும் தந்தார்கள். எங்களுக்கான வேலை வந்து தச்சு வேலை. நாங்கள் இது வேலையும் தெரியாமல் தான் இருந்தோம். அவர்கள் வந்து எங்களை நல்ல ஒரு வேலை திட்டத்தையும் பழக்கிவிட்டு எங்களுக்கான இப்போது இராணுவத்தினர் மீது எங்களுக்கான ஒரு குறைந்த விதத்தில் லோனையும் பெற்று தந்திருக்கின்றார்கள்.
The Sri Lankan Army has donated hundreds of artificial limbs to the ex-LTT cadres and civilians injured in the conflict, most of them crippled by landmines. Before the LTT-controlled areas were liberated, no proper medical care could have been given to these people. Now they're being taken care of and are free to live full and productive lives. With minefields being cleared, many houses rebuilt, schools and medical care provided, and means of sustainable income ensured, the time has come for the last of the internally displaced persons to go home. This group is one of the very last batches leaving the IDP camp to resume their lives. This is the moment these people have been waiting for, with such a great yearning. Their hopes have been mixed with anxiety for such a long time. Now, the long-awaited moment has come. Provisions are being distributed to the resettled families to help them start normal lives as soon as possible. Years of bitterness has created an atmosphere of mistrust and hatred. Reaching out further, the Sri Lankan army has made a practice of donating blood to the reserves of the local hospitals in the north and east. This symbolic yet deeply humane gesture sends the most meaningful message of this era. Let's put the past behind. As an act of recognition of the efforts and goodwill, a local Tamil temple performs a puja for the members of the Sri Lankan army. Old ties are gradually being restored. People of different religions are talking to each other again, aware that their human relations, being now right, is the only true peace. The new world is growing in Sri Lanka, lush, beautiful, and life-giving. Like so many trees of this paradise island, their branches shall never fight among themselves again. One flag is once again flying for all Sri Lankans, promising and safeguarding the long-awaited peace. Reminding us also that peace is not something you wish for. It is something you do, something you are, and something you give.